You know that feeling, Maya, when you are in a virtual meeting, everything is moving normally, and then suddenly someone asks for your opinion, and even though you had a perfectly good idea in your head a moment ago, your mind just goes blank?
Oh, yes, I know it well. It is that strange moment where your heart starts beating faster, everyone seems to be looking at you through the screen, and you are trying to think, speak clearly, sound professional, and stay calm all at exactly the same time.
Exactly. And what makes it even more frustrating is that the problem is not usually that I don't have an idea. Most of the time, I do know what I want to say, but in that moment, I start questioning everything. Is my English correct? Am I being clear enough? Am I sounding too weak? Am I taking too long? And before I manage to organize my thoughts, the conversation has already moved on.
That is such a common experience, and I think it is important to say that right at the beginning, because a lot of professionals assume that if they freeze in meetings, it means their English is not good enough, when in reality, it is often much more about pressure than language.
That already makes me feel better because I think a lot of people listening will recognize that feeling. You work hard, you prepare, you understand the topic, and then the moment comes when you need to speak, and suddenly it feels like all of your confidence has disappeared.
Exactly, and that is what we are talking about today. Welcome to Career English Lab, where we help international professionals communicate more clearly, more confidently, and more professionally at work. Today, we are looking at one of the most stressful and frustrating situations people face in modern workplaces, which is freezing in virtual meetings and struggling to say what they really mean when the pressure is on. I'm Maya, and I'm here with my co host, Leo. Hi, Leo.
Hi, Maya. Hello, everyone.
I think this topic matters even more now because so much of work happens online. It is not only interviews or client presentations anymore. It is team meetings, project updates, internal reviews, brainstorms, and all those smaller moments where you are expected to contribute clearly, often with very little time to think. That is exactly right. Virtual meetings create a different kind of pressure because when you are on a screen, a lot of the natural communication tools you rely on in a room feel weaker. Your presence is reduced, the silence feels longer, people talk over each other more easily, and there is often this strange pressure to respond quickly, even when you need a few more seconds to organize your thoughts.
I had a moment like that recently, and it stayed with me because it was such a simple situation, but I handled it badly. I was in a meeting with my manager, two senior team members, and a client, and we were discussing the campaign launch. As everyone was talking, I could already see the issue. The deadline looked too close to a holiday period, the supplier timing was still uncertain, and I remember thinking we should push this by at least a week. It felt obvious to me.
So you already had the insight. The challenge was not knowledge, the challenge was saying it in the moment.
Exactly. Then there was a pause, and someone said, Leo, what do you think? And for some reason, that simple question completely changed the situation for me. Instead of simply saying what I thought, I started managing all these little internal worries at the same time. I was thinking about tone, grammar, wording, how direct I should sound, whether I should soften it, whether I should wait. And while all of that was happening in my head, the moment passed.
And I imagine that later someone else made a similar point.
Of course they did. About 10 minutes later, someone else said almost the same thing, and everyone agreed it was a smart observation, which made it even more painful because I realized I had the right idea, but I didn't get it out clearly when it mattered.
That is exactly why this topic matters so much. Many capable professionals are not being held back by a lack of knowledge or insight. They are being held back by what happens in those few seconds between having an idea and saying it out loud.
So, if we break that down, what is really happening in those moments? Why do people freeze even when they are prepared?
Usually, it is because they are trying to do too many things at once. They are trying to think of the message, monitor their English, sound confident, sound polite, and manage nerves all in real time. That is a lot for the brain to handle. And when you add the pressure of a virtual environment where silence feels uncomfortable and the pace often feels faster, it is very easy to lose clarity.
That makes sense. So, in a way, the real problem is not always I don't know enough English. It's more that the pressure interrupts your ability to use the English you already have.
Exactly. And that is why one of the most useful mindset shifts is this. Your goal in a meeting is not to sound perfect. Your goal is to sound clear. A lot of people hold themselves back because they think they need perfect wording, perfect grammar, or a very polished answer. But in professional communication, clarity is much more important than perfection.
I love that because I think a lot of people, especially people working in a second language, put huge pressure on themselves to sound flawless. And that pressure alone can make them freeze.
It does. Perfection slows you down. Clarity helps you move. And when you sound clear, people usually experience you as more confident, more credible, and often more senior, even if your English is simple.
So, if clarity is a goal, how do people build that in real life, especially when they know they tend to freeze?
The first thing I recommend is surprisingly simple. Before a meeting, prepare one strong sentence that you are likely to need. Not a full speech, not a long script, just one sentence that captures the main point you may want to make.
That's interesting because most people prepare information, but they don't prepare the sentence they will actually say.
Exactly. They prepare facts, slides, notes, or updates, but they do not prepare the spoken version of their thinking. So when the pressure comes, they are building the message from scratch while speaking, and that is when hesitation starts to creep in.
Can you give an example of what you mean by one strong sentence?
Of course, let's say the meeting is about project timing. A prepared sentence might be, "The current timeline looks tight, and I recommend pushing the deadline by 1 week." It is clear, direct, and easy to remember.
Which already sounds much stronger than what I would naturally say under pressure, which would probably be something like, I was kind of thinking maybe the timeline might be a little bit tight.
Exactly, and that difference is important. Your version is not wrong, but it is full of hesitation, and hesitation changes how people hear the message. The prepared version gives you an anchor, so when someone asks for your view, you are not trying to invent your message under pressure. You are reaching for something you already shaped clearly.
That makes a lot of sense because once you get the first sentence out well, it becomes much easier to keep going.
Yes, and that is why this works. In many cases, people do not need a full speech. They need a strong opening sentence that gets them into the conversation with clarity.
Okay, so that's the first tool. What comes next?
The second tool is having a simple structure for speaking when you need to answer clearly. One of my favorite structures is point, reason, recommendation. It is simple, practical, and easy to apply in real meetings.
I like that already because it sounds easy to remember, and I think people are always looking for something they can use in the moment without overthinking.
Exactly. The idea is that instead of speaking in circles, you move through 3 simple steps. First, make the point. Second, explain the reason. Third, give a recommendation. So, using the same timeline example, you might say, "The timeline looks tight. We still do not have final supplier confirmation. I recommend delaying the launch by 1 week."
That sounds much more professional than the way many people usually speak when they are nervous, because nervous speaking often starts with lots of extra language before the real point arrives.
That is exactly what happens. When people are unsure, they often add too much softening language, too much context, and too many filler phrases. But structured speaking helps people follow you easily. And when people can follow you easily, they tend to trust you more.
So, in a way, confidence is not always about personality. Sometimes it is simply about structure.
Yes, and that is one of the biggest communication shifts people can make. Very often, what sounds like confidence is really just organized thinking. People who sound calm and capable in meetings are not always more fluent or more naturally gifted. Quite often, they have learned how to shape their message clearly and deliver it without too much clutter.
That is encouraging because structure is something people can practice. It's not some mysterious talent you either have or don't have.
Exactly. And that brings us to the third tool, which is one of the biggest issues for people who freeze or sound unsure in meetings. They use too much weak language.
I feel seen already.
Most people do this without realizing it. They say things like maybe, I think, sorry, kind of, just, or this might be wrong. because they want to sound polite or careful. But when you stack too many of those phrases together, your message starts to sound uncertain, even when your idea is good.
Yes, I hear myself doing that all the time. Something like, sorry, this might be wrong, but I think maybe we should review the timeline. And even as I say it, I can hear that it sounds weak.
Exactly. Now, compare it with this version. One concern is the current timeline. I recommend we review it before final sign off. The message is still respectful, but it sounds clearer, steadier, and more professional.
The difference is huge, and it's interesting because the stronger version doesn't sound aggressive. It just sounds more certain.
That is such an important point. People sometimes think the only alternative to weak language is being too blunt, but that is not true. You do not need to sound aggressive, you need to sound clear. And clarity is often more useful than softness in professional settings.
Can we do one more example? I think those before and after comparisons are really useful.
Of course, a weaker version might be, I just wanted to add that maybe the client needs a bit more notice. A stronger version could be, the client may need more notice, so it would help to confirm timing this week. Again, same idea, better delivery.
And I think those examples are especially helpful because they use simple English. There's nothing difficult there, but the tone changes completely.
Exactly. You do not need impressive vocabulary to sound professional. You need useful language that people can understand immediately.
Okay, but let's talk about the actual moment of freezing, because sometimes the problem isn't the sentence itself. Sometimes someone asks you a question and your mind needs a few seconds to catch up. What should people say in that moment?
That is where pause phrases are incredibly helpful. One of the best things you can do when you feel yourself freezing is avoid panic filling the silence. Instead, buy yourself a little time professionally.
And what does that sound like?
It can be as simple as saying, that is a good question, let me think for a moment. Or, let me clarify one point before I answer. Or even, I want to make sure I answer that clearly. These phrases do two things at once. They give you time and they make you sound thoughtful rather than lost.
I really like that because it changes the meaning of the pause. Instead of the pause feeling like failure, it feels like part of a professional response.
Exactly. A short pause is normal. What makes it feel uncomfortable is usually the panic around it, not the pause itself. If you can hold the moment calmly, you often sound more confident than someone who rushes into an unclear answer.
Can we do a quick role play here? Because I think people will find it useful to hear the difference.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay, you ask the question.
Leo, what do you think about the proposed launch date?
All right, here is the weak version. Sorry, I think maybe it could be a bit difficult because we sort of do not have everything confirmed yet.
And that is realistic. A lot of people will recognize themselves in that answer.
Now the stronger version. That is a good question. The current launch date looks tight. We still do not have supplier confirmation, so I recommend delaying by 1 week.
Much better. It is clearer, shorter, easier to follow, and much more confident.
And what I notice immediately is that the stronger version does not sound more advanced. It simply sounds more organized.
Exactly. That is the real lesson. Confidence in meetings is often not about using complicated English. It is about using simple English with structure and control.
I also think people need to hear that even strong professionals still get nervous. Because sometimes we imagine that confident people never feel pressure, and that is simply not true.
Absolutely. Confidence does not mean you never feel nervous. It means you know what to do when nerves show up. The aim is not to remove nerves from your life forever. The aim is to reduce the damage nerves do to your communication.
That feels much more realistic and honestly much more helpful because people don't need a fantasy version of confidence. They need tools they can use in real situations when the pressure is there.
Exactly. And that is what we want this show to do. Not give people perfect textbook English, but help them communicate more effectively in the moments that really matter at work.
So let's recap what we covered today. First, before a meeting, prepare one strong sentence that you're likely to need so you're not building your message from zero under pressure.
Second, when you need to answer clearly, use a simple structure like point, reason, recommendation, because structure helps people follow you and trust you.
Third, pay attention to weak language like maybe, sorry, I think, and just, especially when those words are making your message sound less confident than it needs to be.
And if you need a moment to think, use a professional pause phrase instead of rushing into a messy answer.
If speaking in meetings is something you struggle with, tell us in the comments what feels hardest for you. Is it finding the right words, managing nerves, sounding more confident, or speaking up fast enough when the moment comes?
We read the comments, and your answers will help shape future episodes because many of the best topics come from real situations people face at work every day.
And if you want to sound clearer, stronger, and more professional in English at work, subscribe to Career English Lab.
I'm Naya.
And I'm Leo.
Thanks for listening.
See you in the lab.